We're live. Hello. Welcome to the Bates College Museum of Art podcast. I'm your host, Morgan, and I'm joined here today with our lovely visiting artist, Amber Imrie. Amber, would you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about where you're from and your work a little bit?
Yeah, my name's Amber Imrie, and I'm from rural Arkansas. I was born and raised off-grid in Newton County. I came into the arts kind of late and not from a traditional track. I was a sign language major in community college
wow.
and went to an art museum, and it kind of changed my life. And then I changed my major, and the rest is kind of like history. I don't know, never got out of art from there, still in it. And yeah, I've been making work ever since then. My work is largely like rooted in my own autobiographical perspective and upbringing, heavily influenced by being raised off grid and outside of the public school system and spending my childhood on the land and with the land.
That's incredible. Wow, I didn't know that you were a sign language major.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting because to me, that's like two very different, non-traditional, I guess you could say, forms of communication, art and sign language, and to see how that plays together. Does that background in communication sort of inform your work at all?
Yeah, as you mentioned it, I don't think I've reflected on this outside of this conversation, but let's dive in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I came to sign language out of a dance background and a performance background. Those were the first kind of my first art loves were writing and performance, and then that really went into dance. And then dance moved into communication with the body and into sign language. And I definitely still utilize that. Like, not only do I bring the body into my work as a way of communicating, but I also use my body as a way of communicating with my work. I use a lot of embodiment and embodied exercises and ways of experimenting through lived experiences and through putting my body in certain positioning down to I squat a lot to get into the act of play. And so a way of like triggering the body through its own movements. And then, the works that I have in IM Studios are all, they're stories that are told in more of a poetic way, and almost like the way that a GIF kind of tells a story. The more times you watch it in repetition,
Sure, yeah.
its meaning changes. And in that work, I'm very much utilizing my body as a way of communicating non-verbally about these stories through the ways that I am using my body on the land, using my body as a place to mark language, and using my body as a way of labor. Two of the works, both TikTok and 360-degree turn, really look at labor and the body, being gendered within that labor as well.
Yeah, amazing. So you mentioned IM Studios, you mentioned some different titles of your work. I just want to give our viewers a little overview of also why you're here as our visiting artist today. We are opening a show tomorrow at Bates College Museum of Art called Across Common Grounds, Art Outside of the Center. Amber has some works that are in a satellite location in Quorum Library here at Bates. It's called IM Studio, and it's a space where we can, I guess, play a little bit more with digital forms of art. And so would you be able to talk a little bit more in depth about, you already talked a bit about
But like
your work.
what's in that room?
What is in that room? Can you tell us?
Yeah, so there are 4 video pieces in the room right now. And the exciting thing for me is like I've seen all of these video works live in my phone and on my computer, and now they are all in the same space communicating with each other, which is a lot of how I originally thought about this work. So the works are all themed around the persona identity stereotype of rednecks. And I bring my own queer identity into that. And that really comes from a personal journey of growing up in the South, not identifying personally as a redneck, but being identified as a redneck, both by people in the South and predominantly by people outside of the South. especially like moving to California at 12. I erased my accent very intentionally. And I was met with a lot of presumptions that were honestly very surprising from the perspective of a Southerner, where you're like, what century do you think
Yeah.
we're in? So those works are very informed from an experience of growing up in the South and not living in the South. And they're both like, they're made in some part for the folks whom, are like me, and they've lived in the South, and then they've met the stereotypes of both their intelligence, their political demeanor, their identity, their left or right-leaning ideology, based on a caricature that has kind of been drawn up. So the works in the space, one of them is just called Redneck, and it shows me writing the term redneck on my neck again and again until my neck is completely covered in this lacy-like pattern that develops from those words interlinking around each other. And then from that, I go from wearing a wife beater to putting on a white button-up T-shirt and on glasses. And for that work, for me, it's really a story about questioning class mobility and class elasticity. And if I change my socioeconomic standing as somebody who grew up white and impoverished in the South, can I get rid of this identity marker? Can I get rid of this stereotype? And it's just leaving that as a question. There is no real answer in that video. As next to that is a piece called TikTok. And this work is a bit more poetic and a little bit less narrative, where it is kind of sandwiched on two sides as the first video and last video of a long shot of me crocheting a red infinity scarf that eventually gets wrapped around my head until it covers my eyes. And I'm in a rocking chair, and there's a cuckoo clock behind me. And if you watch the full duration of the film, which is an hour and 20 minutes, and I expect no one to watch it, it's very much made as almost like a GIF where you get a little piece of it. And if you do watch the whole thing, you'll notice the sun moves at a different rate than the clock does. So in that piece, I'm thinking about time and labor and how they connect to the South in a different way than other areas, both in the way that the South was built up on this exploitation of labor and the speeding up of time, and then also how has the South been trapped in time or experienced time differently since the Civil War in connection with development, labor, and land.
It's incredible.
Next to that piece is a piece called Bootstrapped. And in that piece, I very simply gave myself some parameters for a performance. I wanted to physiologically try and pick myself up by the bootstraps, very much in line with what I had heard needed to be the way that I escaped my class was I could do that myself, just pick myself up by the bootstraps. So I very much looked at that from my own journey. I did come from poverty. I'm no longer impoverished. And I very much see that as a change in my landscape at an opportune moment that gave me possibilities I don't have on my own. So this film is 18 minutes long, and I really do invite you to watch the whole duration of it. There are two different cameras it is filmed with. One is a long shot and one is a personal shot. And when I was making this piece, I very much was thinking about, like, who was the camera? And so the long shot is, for me, very much our culture and society of how we see somebody's upward mobility. We see it from afar. We don't experience the suffering. We only see them, struggling and then maybe getting up and walking away. And then there is a camera that is actually attached to my boot. And that camera very much shows the personal journey and the actual pain it takes in trying to achieve upper mobility. In the whole video, you watch me struggle time and time again to throw myself, my head or my feet over my head to land on my feet. So I'm throwing myself backwards down a hill that I am time and time again using my boots to grab and pull myself up. And so I was very much thinking about how do you actually land on your feet? How do you actually achieve this? And part of it is your social and cultural landscape that you are able to tap into, those different resources, fellowships, grants, funding for low-income students. And then the other point is throwing yourself head over heels time and time again and falling and failing.
Yeah, and failing.
And then picking yourself back up and trying it again. And so when I was in that field with those parameters of like, I can't get up unless I pull myself with my bootstraps, well, I thought the only way I could do that is if I pulled my feet over my head and was able to land on my feet through falling. And so that's very much how I get back on my feet in the video. And I feel like that's very much how you get on your feet when you are doing that. And then lastly in the show is a piece called 360-Degree Turn. And it is 6 videos of me mowing a lawn on a 360-degree turn lawnmower, which is a very like fancy lawnmower. This is like the lawnmower of the lawnmowers. It's like what the wealthy people have. Yeah. And so it's very much showing the redneck of as achieving this status and mowing the lawn being this like, you know, in bootstrapped, I'm on the ground, I'm in the grasses, I'm pulling myself along it. And then in that one, I'm very much like have achieved that class. And the T-shirt I've decided to wear in this, all of these films, I'm either in a white button-up or in a white wife beater. Very much talking about white collars and white class. Yeah. And in the 360-degree turn, I chose a white T-shirt that had text on it. And on this text, it says energized across the middle, which I feel is just like this like transformation of who the redneck could become if we allowed this character, this stereotype, this identity to evolve with our times. And around the energized is a lot of little words in gray. And one of these words is the word woke. And I really wanted to enter the word woke into the concept of being a redneck. Yeah. Because I very much feel like the entire creation of this term in American culture, like the term comes from England. It comes from the Scottish clans revolting against England as England colonized Scotland. So it was an anti-colonialist term. It was a way of identifying a revolt. And when it came to the United States, it was utilized as a way of identifying the indentured servants and poor whites. And then it was utilized through a lot of very well-documented political ads in newspapers to support slavery by getting white people to separate their identity from other poor black people stuck in their same position. Yeah. So the minority was more segregated and they could be more easily controlled. Right. So I just keep going back to it being like, yo, rednecks, like, we used to be the revolters too. Like, this is very much our identity. Like, be woke. So both the term of that, you know, the titling of that piece particularly is kind of like my cry out of being like, hey, can you guys like turn around and like make that little pivot?
That's such a great explanation of what's going on in that space. I also want to talk about the Across Common Grounds show that's in our physical museum space because I think it's a really interesting show. The subtitle here is Art Outside of the Center, Works from Outside of the Center. And this idea of place so closely tied with identity, I think is a theme that is really prevalent in all the works that are in the show. And so I was wondering how, first of all, where are you from? Tell us a little bit more about where you're from. You're from the Ozarks, you're from Arkansas, but you've lived in, you told me earlier, 4 different countries. I'm so interested in that. And how does that identity, impact your works, maybe works that aren't also in the show, just your work in general as an artist? I'm really interested in knowing that.
Yeah. So, born and raised in Arkansas. Well, I moved away at 12. So, born and raised through middle school in Arkansas. And then I lived in northern and central and southern California for about 20 years. And then I moved to Europe and lived in Sweden, Finland, and Portugal during the pandemic, which all of that was very interesting, living abroad during a global pandemic. Through my life, I've went from being in the lowest economic bracket of American society to the top 12%. And making that transition and walking in those different worlds has been kind of mind-blowing in some ways and illuminating in others. I use the term class drag as a way of describing the code switching that can take place, walking those different areas. And so the work that is in the Across Common Grounds show in Bates Museum, I have 2 textile pieces in that show, or photographic textile pieces. And one of them is called On the Green, and the other one is called Above Ground. And both of them show some type of luxurious activity from a non-upper class perspective. So the On the Green shows a handmade mini golf course built on my friend's property. And the piece Above Ground shows an above ground pool. And in both of those, if you think about the country club and the luxury around the country club and what that means, you think of golf courses and pools, and you don't think of the aesthetic that I am showing in those works. So I'm very much thinking about luxury in connection with class and what really is luxurious as a big question I think I'm questioning. And, I'm a person who came from all of this. I went into the glittering world of Silicon Valley. I have hung out at Sam Altman's house and met all these famous people and been to these amazing big places. And I find myself navigating back to the same little mountains because there's a type of luxury on the land and interconnectedness with community that's just more authentically human.
Yeah.
And I think honestly more luxurious for the soul than a lot of the things that we think are luxurious.
Yeah. It's incredible. Thank you. So I guess, this is one of my favorite questions to ask artists from this show. And that is, what does working outside of the center mean to you? Because it's such an interesting term. And I think it varies artist to artist. And is it physical? Is it metaphorical? Is it, the materials that you're working with? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I recently have been in the last year, I was really deciding, do I want to stay in Arkansas? I've only been back for 2 years, but I was thinking of leaving. I had the opportunity to leave, still have the opportunity to leave. And a lot of people in my art ecosystem was really supportive of an idea I had to move to the New England area, to New York or outside Pennsylvania, in Pennsylvania. And people really spoke about how much that would be supportive for my art practice. But I really felt like this was a false narrative for this idea of work outside the center, because for me, the center is in Arkansas.
Yeah.
And so for me, I really had to ask myself, is it more important to be in somebody else's art center or to be in my own? And for me, my own art center is being surrounded by the culture that feeds my art, that inspires my art, that understands it from a lived perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And being back and inside of that, allowing that to change my work. I'm no longer making work about a place that is nostalgic and only existing in my memory, but I am making work about a place that I am currently living.
Yeah. Incredible. Thank you. And to wrap it up, I want to know, I think this is a trend I'm going to start, and I'm going to start with you. This is full transparency. You're my second podcast guest.
Sweet.
And I want to know, what is your favorite artist, art maker, art practice, art group? Who are they, and why do they inspire you?
I'm gonna say Janine Antony. She and Nick Luna's work in undergrad, when I was still a sign language major, inspired me to change my major from sign language to art. When I was in grad school, I had the amazing opportunity that Nick Luna was one of our visiting artists and did a studio visit with me. And that studio visit really changed some aspects of how I was working, that continues today. And then I have the current job I have. Because Janine Antony was teaching at the school, I sent a random letter asking if they wanted help. And they said yes. And now I'm a co-founder of it. And she's my colleague and I work with her. And so I've gotten to know her on a personal level and in a more embodied way. And I think that it's been really inspiring not only to see her just as a human, but also to understand her work from more of an embodied way of working with her at the school and talking with her through that. So I think that, yeah, she's kind of still my favorite artist. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was an incredible interview. Again, for all of our listeners here, come check out the show. It's up until March 15th. Our IM Studios exhibition is up until October 25th. And I really hope that you all get the chance to come check out Amber's work and all the other incredible work that we have up. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.